What is up, my friends? Welcome to the CrossFit Edwardsville Community Podcast, where we get to meet and learn from our CFE coaches, as well as learn more about some of our local CrossFitters themselves. And then we also get the opportunity to meet and learn from some of our locally owned Glen Ed businesses and, frankly, some of the characters behind them. I'm your co-host, Dallas Amston. I am the Chief Ignition Officer of Men of Faith and Fire, host of the podcast of the same name, and I help Christian dads kind of defeat their overwhelm and their burnout. And today I get to be having a conversation about intermittent fasting with Coach Greg Skelly and Coach Kelsey Albers, both of the coaching team here at CrossFit Edwardsville. Coach G, how are you today, man?
Man, I'm good. Glad to be hanging out with you guys today. Glad to be indoors when it's raining outside, but glad it's getting warmer too. I'm having a good day so far. Good. How about you guys?
Good to hear. Good. I'm doing well. How about you, Coach Kelsey?
Awesome. Same thing. Glad it's getting warmer, and I'm okay. I'm inside working on a rainy day because I'd be mad if it was nice.
Well, Kelsey, also, we're really excited because you just got a new podcast microphone. So you're taking this thing seriously right now. Everybody, legit. Give her props.
It's very intimidating.
You're doing great with it.
Kelsey is leveling up. This is about to get real.
That's right. So today we get the opportunity we get the opportunity to talk about intermittent fasting, and or IF, we might call it that as we go. But it's gained a lot of traction as an avenue for people to lose weight, optimize hormonal balances, make significant body composition changes, as well as feel better, optimize their athletic performance. Intermittent fasting has really been embraced not just by weight loss candidates, but also by well-known elite athletes such as CrossFit Games champion Rich Froning, UFC welterweight champion George St. Pierre. They give it credit for taking their performance to the next level. And truth be told, it's being touted by many in the medical community. Dr. Jason Fung is one of them. And then thought leaders in the holistic health community. Nutrition guru Mark Sisson, he says it's a way of achieving lasting breakthrough in a battle against obesity, as well as a fight to gain metabolic flexibility, which we might dig into that a little bit. But even some of our own CFE community themselves really have become committed intermittent fasters. Coach Jake Seabach, he's one of them. Coach Mark Donovan, Coach Caroline Skelly, as well as some of our long-term CrossFitters, Josh Dickerson, and a podcast guy named Dallas Amston. And even you, Coach Kelsey, you wouldn't say you're a committed intermittent faster. How would you define it for you?
I would say, so I do intermittent fast, but I am selective about what days I do it. And we can talk more about how I make the choices day by day on what my eating window will look like.
Sure, absolutely. So that's what we're going to talk about today is some of those topics around intermittent fasting. And we're going to have a conversation about it, what it is, why it might be beneficial for you, and some tips and strategies for introducing it into your healthy eating game plan. So let's start at the very foundation. The starting place is a very good place to start, right? Or no, what's the old line? The beginning. It's a very good place to start. What is intermittent fasting? And G, I'm going to throw this at you first, and then we'll toss it at Kelsey.
Sure. So intermittent fasting is an eating pattern that cycles between intentional periods of fasting and eating. And it doesn't necessarily specify like what foods to eat, but rather like when to be eating them. And it's in some circles, it's also known as time restricted feeding, or TRF, maybe like alternate day fasting, ADF, or periodic fasting as well.
Awesome. Coach Kelsey, anything to add to that?
I think that's pretty basic. I would say, though, for our podcast, I think that we should probably, when we are talking about intermittent fasting, especially because we're talking to CrossFitters, we should probably specify that we're talking about a restricted eating window in a single day and less about doing 1 or 2 or 3 day fasts regularly, right? I mean, we can pull in some of that, but intermittent fasting, as G pointed out, could either mean that you only eat in an 8-hour window or you eat 1 day on and 1 day off. And that's too big and different variations.
Yeah. So you actually kind of leaned into part of my next question there, which really, let's clarify what it isn't necessarily. What does it not imply? So anything further to add to that, G, on what she was just saying there?
Yeah, and we want to be really clear as we start this conversation that intermittent fasting is not the same thing as saying we're going to eat less, that we're going to consume less food. It just means that we're eating less frequently. So maybe instead of your traditional 3 meals a day plan, maybe you have 2 meals a day, maybe you have 1 meal a day, or as Kelsey alluded to earlier, you simply confine your consumption to a specific eating window instead of having all day be the eating window.
Yeah.
And it's also really important to clarify that it is not a license to eat anything and everything during that window, because the what we eat still matters a lot. It always matters. So to clarify, intermittent fasting is not like a true diet in the conventional sense. It's more like accurately described as an eating pattern, but it might be a valuable one for the right person.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I know too that a lot of anthropologists lean into it as a way that we used to eat. We weren't humans forever weren't 3 to 6 square meals a day. We weren't necessarily grazing, although I know that became a popular pattern in quote dieting, to graze all day to keep that metabolic furnace going. But a lot of anthropologists I know have argued that it is, you would hunt the buffalo, and then you would eat the buffalo, and you might have to wait 3 or 4 days before you hunt another buffalo, and you'd kind of feed on what was left. So what do you guys, throwing a curveball here question at you, but what do you think of those two different styles, and what might be the benefits between that grazing versus like eating once and then going off of the anthropological point of view?
Kelsey, you want to go first? You want me to take it?
No, I have a thought on this. So I do think that we're going to talk about a lot of the nuances of intermittent fasting and who it might be appropriate for. But I think that most Americans could use to restrict their eating window, right? Like a lot of us wake up and eat the minute we wake up, and we're snacking well into 10, 11, 12 o'clock at night. And we'll talk about why that isn't a great idea. But I think that restricting that is a great idea. However, somebody who's more grazing or eating 6 meals a day, I found that is really helpful whenever we're talking about healing like hormonal dysfunction or HbA axis, which is also known as adrenal fatigue. So some of these strategies can be really important. Or as we move through, for women particularly, as we move through our menstrual cycle and our hormones shift, it can be beneficial to adjust those eating schedules based on what's going on.
Sure. Yeah, that's a really good point. G, you got anything to add to that?
Well, I would say that intermittent fasting probably does better replicate. If you're interested in what like our Paleolithic ancestors actually did, like the practical lifestyle of people that didn't really
I'm always interested in what our Paleolithic ancestors did.
Well, they didn't struggle with a lot of the metabolic dysfunction that we do, right? So you think like in theory, there's probably something to how they ate, their eating pattern, that maybe we can learn from, since our country, the world now struggles with metabolic dysfunction. It's always getting worse. Yeah. So there might be something to the pattern of like, well, maybe we can learn something from people that had periods of feasting and fasting by necessity. They would hunt, they would acquire food, they'd have food, eat a big meal, and then it might be a while before they could eat again. So there really might be something to this. But I would say that it definitely does mirror our ancestry much more than the post-agricultural revolution world pattern of eating does, for sure.
Sure. Let's talk about...
Can I add one thing in there? Yeah. So yes, I agree with everything G said about how it mimics it. But I also, when we're talking about, I just think with intermittent fasting, we always need to put like this asterisk or this caveat into like, yes, this is how our ancestors ate. But when we're talking to the CrossFit Edwardsville community, our ancestors weren't doing CrossFit 3 times a day, if that's what you do, right? So, so yes, they could eat a buffalo and survive 3 days because they were doing a different type of movement, and more intense in some ways and less intense than others. So as we go into this conversation, let's be really intentional about, we still need to fuel the exercise that we want to do, and probably doing multiple or 3-day fasts on top of each other because it mimics ancestors might not be the way to go.
So what I hear Kelsey saying right now is if you go back and look at cave paintings, you will see kettlebell swings,
Right.
although they probably weren't Russian kettlebell
Thrusters,
swings, right? You will see a couple of those things.
Right.
That's awesome. Well, let's so G, you brought up something here a minute ago. You just dropped it in there and I'm like, doggone it, he dropped it in. Now we got to sit on it for a minute. Let's talk about some of those metabolic things, the metabolic syndrome, hyperinsulin, and you're going to say it, hyperinsulinemia. Sure.
Yeah.
Obesity issue. Yep. So let's talk about some of that metabolic stuff a little bit and how this could potentially be a good solution for someone to try.
Well, we're getting into the science behind this. So if you're talking to an intermittent faster, the argument goes this way. And I think what's really kind of fascinating about intermittent fasting is that it is legitimately, there's very good scientific backing for this, for time restricted feeding, for different patterns of fasting. There's very good data behind this, which is encouraging. And we have scientific evidence that can actually give us some clues as to how all this plays out. But a lot of the core of the argument is that if you're eating all the time, like every few hours, you stay in this perpetually elevated insulin state. Yeah. And you never really tap into your body fat stores in that you're constantly dependent on repeated carb replenishment. So you get up with this perpetually elevated insulin level that's known as hyperinsulinemia. And insulin, for folks that are still kind of like, if you've never heard it outside the context of type 2 diabetes, what it actually does is it lowers blood sugar and it calls on cells to store food for short-term use in muscles or long-term use as adipose tissue in fat. So with perpetually elevated insulin levels, you store more fat, and fat itself being a metabolically and hormonally active tissue in the body, it actually sabotages your efforts to destroy it. It increases in body fat, make it harder to lose weight in the first place because fat is not an inert tissue. It fights to preserve itself. It's hormonally and metabolically active. So now, by contrast, in your fasted state, insulin levels are lower. HGH, we can talk about this in a minute, like human growth hormone levels are higher, sometimes 500% higher. And then stored body fat is, in theory, more accessible and would, in theory, be more readily used by the body.
So in essence, it's using, it's saying, hey, this is the fuel source we're going to use now because your insulin levels are so low. So it's pulling from the stored fat. Would that be a layman's term for it, G?
Yeah, that's a good 30,000 square foot view of it. Yeah.
Okay. Kelsey, anything to add to that?
The other thing that I wanted to chat about with benefits, whenever you start talking about fasting, I hear a lot, two phrases or two words, and they're mTOR and autophagy. And those are two of the huge benefits. So I just want to explain what those are, if that's okay.
Please.
So what mTOR is basically a pathway of how we synthesize protein in and out of our body. And that just basically means, are we in growth mode? Are we in repair mode? And what we want to point out too with mTOR is that you would think, okay, we want to be in growth mode. So the higher we have or higher mTOR pathways are, the better. Yeah. That's not necessarily true. Those higher mTOR pathways means that we're stimulating growth like cancer, right? And what fuels those higher mTOR levels are higher glucose levels.
Okay.
Conversely, if we lower our mTOR or inhibit our mTOR, which is one of the benefits of fasting, we actually increase our repair and maintenance of our muscles, which is the word for that. The repair and maintenance is autophagy, right? Yeah. So, and again, low insulin is what stimulates the lower mTOR or autophagy pathways. So if anybody's ever heard those two words, that's sort of what we're talking about, and where a lot of the benefits of fasting, we talk around increasing our longevity, increasing our lifespan, and not just to be in vegetable state, but to be active and adding good quality years on our life. And that's one benefit of intermittent fasting.
Well, and for those of you who don't notice, we don't have Bill Nye the Science Guy on this, but I'm thoroughly enjoying this conversation between the mTORs, the autophagy, all the stuff that G was just talking about. One of the things too that starts to happen, at least in my fasting experience, is I quit having any kind of dips in energy up and down. I kind of start to get a cool energy that just sustains itself, where yes, if you're not hydrating properly, you're dealing with the hunger pangs, and we'll talk about some of the techniques here in just a little bit, but it's that up and down energy after a meal or something like that sometimes can be problematic for people too.
Right.
So I had a chance to also, I messaged Coach Jake for this conversation to have him, hey, send me some of the benefits that you get, because like Coach Jake is a absolutely committed intermittent faster. Yeah. He sent me like 2 paragraphs of just like all the things. So yeah. I added it to my list of like the benefits to this. I think it's really cool. So I'll share some of the things that I found, learning about this. And then over the years, which by the way, I first learned about intermittent fasting from Aaron Specht about 10 years ago. Okay. He was the one that first told me about it. I'd never heard those words in my entire life until he told me about it. And at the time, he was down 75 pounds and he was like a whole new man. Like his life was transformed. So it kind of woke me up to it and I started paying more attention. So yeah. Like I've looked at it like, intermittent fasting, there's benefits on hormone levels, fat levels, healing levels. And to do a little bit more of a deep dive on that, like insulin. So your fasters often see lower average insulin levels and greatly improved insulin sensitivity. As I mentioned before, human growth hormone levels in the blood can increase up to 500%, which is valuable for a lot of reasons. One of which, and most salient to this audience probably, is makes fat loss easier and muscle gain easier, potentially. Fasters claim it's often easier to break through fat cutting and weight loss plateaus because of the hormonal benefits. Mm-hmm. There are healing benefits, cellular and gene level both. When you're fasted, your body redirects resources away from digestion and toward healing processes, which includes cellular repair, which includes that magic word, autophagy, again, where you have cells digesting or removing old dysfunctional protein accumulations, right? Yep. And there's good data. I love this part, that people who have a fasting pattern of eating often see the genes that are related to longevity or immunity, resistance to disease, those get better as well. And then you get to Jake's long list of benefits, metabolic flexibility, which if I talked for too long, I feel like I've been going on. No, go, man. I went off on a spree. So he's like, it's cool because like this works with primal, keto, paleo, carnivore diets. It works with a lot of different patterns, right? So if you have one of those that you're particularly engaged to, like you can still keep that. Mark Sisson champions it as a way of improving metabolic flexibility, which for the purpose of our conversation here just means that the body becomes adept at metabolizing not just carbohydrate for energy, but also body fat and other sources, your proteins, your fats. Like you become adaptable to using different fuel sources, which means you have more options on the table for energy and you're not as dependent on carbs anymore. It helps us break our dependence on all the processed carbs. Sure. Fasters don't have to think about food as often. Frees them up to think about other things. Something that Dallas and I talked about before. That's the point you and I've talked about because, and Kelsey, real fast to insert this, we've talked in the past on this about the abstainer versus the moderator. And as an abstainer, for me, sometimes like the fasting mentality is like, man, I don't have to think about it till this evening. Great. I can just work. Right. So yeah, go ahead, G. Oh, go ahead.
I would bet dollars to like keto donuts that most of the people that really lean into and embrace fasting are an abstainer. So just kind of something as you're like talking to people who are like, I love intermittent fasting, they probably do better because their personality leans more towards the clear guardrails. Yeah.
I might even throw a potential, like, I don't know, the flip side of that coin. After reading Mark Sisson's book, he's a paleo primal guy. He wrote the book on it. based on what I hear from him, I swear he's a moderator. In fact, like that's exactly what I was thinking when I read his text. I understand the attraction of it because being an abstainer like Dallas, I love having the bright lines where like I'm not even going to think about eating until XYZ time of day, and then I'm going to enjoy the food that I have at that time. But Mark Sisson's approach is so moderator. I thought it would blow Kelsey's mind. Like I was reading this like Kelsey's going to see moderator all over this thing.
I need to look in. I need to read his and see if I can't peg him. Or if somebody out there knows Mark Sisson, I would love to know what he thinks he is.
Well, it sounds like G can text him.
Yeah.
I wish.
I thought you said you read a text from him. Sorry, you were reading his text. Got it.
His text, his book. Yeah.
Anyway. I gotcha. Well, so G, one of the things, obviously you just mentioned things like the carb dependency, metabolic flexibility, and obviously there is a lot of research that backs a bunch of that. I know when I first was looking into it as well, I thought to myself, this makes good sense. It makes good scientific sense. It looks like it's going to work. It worked for me. I mean, Kelsey, you don't know this, but I've dropped 40 pounds with intermittent fasting, and
awesome. Congratulations.
Thank you. I couldn't do it. I could not do it counting macros and carbs and inserting all my food. Again, it was that abstainer side of me that was just like, no, I just need to not think about it. And when I eat fairly clean. I still get the ice cream every now and again when I'm refeeding, but yeah, refeeding, it sounds awesome. But I'm sure a lot of other people still have doubts and questions. So what would be, what would be some of the most common concerns or fears that people would have associated with intermittent fasting? Kelsey, you want to take this one first?
Sure. So one of the most common ones that I hear, so I'm going to speak specifically to the female population, right? So there is a lot of information out there about how intermittent fasting is bad for your chances of getting pregnant, is bad for hormonal health, is bad for pregnancy and breastfeeding and everything. And I will say this, like if you are pregnant or if you are trying to establish a milk supply, I don't think that intermittent fasting is a path that you should try, right? Like there's a lot of other things to do, but probably not for you right now. There is not a lot of research that intermittent fasting, when done well, is actually harmful to hormonal health. What we tend to see with women is that when they are doing intermittent fasting, they don't eat enough. And G, you already talked about this, but the fear is that we just eat less if we have less of a window, right? So we still need to be eating enough, but we don't need to undereat calories to intermittent fast well. Yeah. So that would be the big one that I would say. Again, I think all of this is in context, right? Because we can drive a stake through intermittent fasting because the way it's being advised to be done is not sufficient, right? We can work around a lot of these things.
Sure. And I would also say to that, when you're in those eating windows, get your protein. Don't lean heavy into the carbs. Make sure you're getting your proteins. Oh, I'm getting the root praise from Kelsey.
It's the emoji, right? The protein and fat. And I have found that, G, you mentioned all of the different keto, paleo, carnivore, all of these things that work really well with intermittent fasting. So a smarter carb approach with lower protein and higher protein and the correct amount of fat are going to make intermittent fasting easier.
Sure. Yep. G, what about you? Any other concerns or fears that you can think of that we should address?
Hunger. People worried about being hungry, and they're not wrong, especially early on, because if we are coming into this from a standard American diet or coming into this where you are carb dependent, you haven't necessarily been eating intentionally or in a pattern, an intentional pattern, you're going to have your body mutiny and kind of fight back against you initially. That's completely normal and natural. Like the good news is it does go away as your body adapts, as your body becomes more metabolically flexible, as it learns to draw on fat stores, as your body learns that, I'm not going to be eating exactly at 7 a.m., noon, and 6 p.m. every single day, which your body will adapt to the environment that it's in. If you're used to eating at noon every single day, you'll get hungry at noon until you're not used to eating at noon every single day. So hunger is a big one.
Yeah.
I've also heard in the first few days, especially, headaches are a very common side effect. This can be combated by improving water intake. A lot of folks don't drink enough water. If you are staying sufficiently hydrated, it can help that, and it does tend to pass after the first few days. Some other supplementation can help as well.
Yeah.
And being hangry is actually a thing. That is a real thing. So if you have somebody in your household who may be embarking on the intermittent fasting journey, you might just be expecting some irritability early on. Again, that goes away as your body adapts, but irritability and fatigue initially those are some real struggles early on. And
Right.
Dallas, maybe you could speak to that a little bit, your own experience, whether
Sure.
you fought, irritability, fatigue, headaches, any of that stuff yourself.
Sure. So when I kind of first started embarking on it, for me, definitely the keto flu happened. Definitely happened in those first couple of days, and when that did, that was for sure part of it. I am gonna show a little secret here, not just the hydration of water, but I usually drink about a gallon a day right now. But electrolyte replenishment, and the one I use is called Ultima, and it's a 0 sugar, 0 carbs, so you remain in a fasted state, but keeping your electrolyte levels up helps with the hunger pangs as well, and it helps with just that sense of satiety. But the other thing too is, as weird as it sounds, cold water helps. Drinking colder water for some reason, I don't know why. Mentally, that really helps me. But extra hydration, yeah, you're going to pee a lot. But keeping those electrolyte levels up too helps with the hangry side of it as well.
I would add to that, Dallas. I think you guys both mentioned the electrolytes. I think the electrolyte supplementation isn't just an option, but I think it is borderline necessary, right?
Agreed.
I don't want to say for every single person because I don't know how your diets are, but if you're going to try an intermittent fasting protocol, because our body, especially if you're dropping carbs, our body is flushing. It's not necessarily that we're eating less electrolytes. It's that the kidneys are flushing electrolytes. So not only do you have that period where you're not eating them, but you have a period where your body is actively removing them. So that should help with fatigue, headaches, lightheadedness, even hunger pains. So I'll have to check out that brand, Dallas. If anybody else is looking for another brand, Element is the one I used. It's LMNT. It's their flavors are amazing and all approved for fasting. So, and then one other note on the hunger that G mentioned, one of my biggest takeaways from Dr. Fung's book was he said multiple times, like, hunger will pass. And I realized when I was reading that book that everybody is so afraid of being hungry. Like, is there anything worse than being like, but I'm going to be hungry? That hunger will pass, especially if your eating window is like, or your fasting window is 16 hours. Like, you will survive. You will get there. It'll pass.
Well, and you'll be surprised, actually. I have found this. You'll be surprised if you're focused on other things, your productivity goes up.
Yeah,
as weird as it sounds, you don't have those energy lulls. So if you're busy and remain busy, your productivity actually goes up because you're not thinking about food as often or stopping to take those breaks either. And that's a weird thing, but distraction is an incredible tool. So, so we kind of talked about, obviously, right here, the first one was hydration and keeping those electrolyte levels up. That's a great thing to think for someone who is going, all right, I'm interested in trying this out. So what are some of the best practices for starting an intermittent fasting protocol? So obviously hydration, but what might be some of the other best practices that you all can think of? G, let's toss this at you first.
Right off the bat, eat real nutrient-dense foods. There's no getting around this. Intermittent fasting is not your cheat sheet to get away from that. Like, we're talking like meats, vegetables, fruits, nuts and seeds, like, butters, like real legit foods that you find on the periphery of the grocery store. Still a great idea, so that you're actually getting the nourishment that you need. Even if you're eating less often, you want to be sure that you're actually getting the sustenance that you need to replenish your body's needs, keep your energy levels up, keep your mental focus, and actually empower you to do cool stuff. Because none of us want to be skinny and too exhausted to do anything. Right. It's not any better. It's not any better to be skinny and exhausted.
What's that old saying? skinny looks better than chocolate tastes or something like that. I forget what that old saying is.
Yeah, exactly. So I would start by like really emphasizing real nutrient dense foods. And then unless you are a true abstainer, I say consider easing into intermittent fasting. It doesn't have to be every single day when you start. It doesn't have to be a strict 16-8 when you start. In fact, the many people that do intermittent fasting, they have breakfast, they have dinner, and they don't do the lunch in between. And that is how they intermittent fast. They have their 2 meals, and then it lets them get the nourishment that they need, but they can have a 12-hour fasting window right there in the middle. And as long as you're hitting at least a 12-hour fasting window, that should be sufficient to at least start deriving a lot of the benefits that we talked about earlier.
What about you, Coach Kelsey? What do you think? There's some ease into it sort of steps.
Right. So kind of on the easing into it and timing is I would recommend people really give some consideration behind when, okay, so let's say we're doing a 10-hour eating window. When do I do that 10-hour eating window? And you will find people who have put their stake in the ground on both ends of the day, right? Like skip breakfast so you can stay in fat burning longer, or stop or don't eat dinner so you can burn fat, like turn off that digestion for sleep, right? And my response to that is the best eating window is whatever works best for your schedule. It's whatever you can maintain, right? So I talk to a lot of people where dinner time is family time and they want to sit down and they want to have a meal, right? So maybe your fasting window starts later in the morning and goes through dinner time. Maybe you work a night shift. So that means your fasting or your eating window starts at 6 a.m. and goes to 2 p.m. or whatever it is. There is a lot of, like every nutrition protocol, there's a lot of dogma about fasting, and people will find a hill to die on with it. There is a lot of good you can do.
I will die on this hill. I will die on the electrolyte hill.
Hey, I will too. Yeah, definitely.
That's one hill I'll die on.
But when it comes to fasting timing, that eating window timing, it is whatever you can maintain and keep sane with. So be intentional, sit down, think about your schedule, and pick a window that works for you, not that works for the next person. And I would also say with that is consider what time of day you work out, right? So if you're a 5 a.m. workouter and you're not going to break your fast until 12 noon, that could cause some problems because then we're missing that post-workout anabolic window where we can really refeed that muscle. So maybe you're fasting, and this is when I talked about when I was strategic with my fasting, the only time of day I can work out is 5:30 a.m. So after I have a hard workout, I can't get to that next one without being completely smashed. So I have a longer eating window on workout days and shorter eating window on rest days. And that is okay. Like that, you will still see great results from a strategy like that.
Yeah.
What you're speaking to also, Coach Jake is very specific on this as well. Like he starts his feasting window somewhere between roughly like noon and 5, and he's done eating by 7 or 8. But he says like he's always going to have a meal after his workout.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
To start that refueling, replenishment, healing process Kelsey's referencing. So
yeah. And one other thing too, I would just say if you're looking at how to get started is yes, abstainer here, jump right in 2 feet deep in. I'll learn to swim at the bottom of the pool. But the other thing I would say too is start cutting down your carbs and your bad carbs and your sugars and your sodas and things before you get into a fasting protocol, because if you don't, the sugar crash is going to be worse. For sure. Yeah. So, start to bring those down a little bit the week before and bring your hydration up the week before that you would start this. But that way you're the quote keto flu or whatever it is, the term is for IF, that you don't hit that and crash against that wall as hard either.
Right.
Yeah, I've seen that happen a lot of times with the people here at CFE who do a nutrition program. Is if like the weekends before they start, is Mardi Gras. Yeah. Then Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday hits them like a Mack truck, and it's savage. It's just savage.
Yeah.
So gradually eliminating your processed everything, your processed foods, your refined crap, the sugars, the bread, cereals, rices, pastas, grapes, whatever it is that for you, whatever processed stuff is in the mix for you, getting away from those as fast as possible so that you have real nourishment, so you can actually get the nutrients that you need out of this.
Sure.
And whether it's intermittent fasting or any other nutrition plan, the elimination of mindless eating, where like you're just watching a television program and just eating because you're bored, that has to stop right away. That's going to murder gains real quick too.
I have found in the evenings for me, like when my wife and I actually get the chance to sit down and the kids have gone to sleep and we're going to watch a show, I usually drink a yogi bedtime tea or a nighttime tea, something that's soothing and relaxing, has a little bit of flavor, has a little bit of heat to it, but that becomes a to-do rather than having the bag of chips or the bag of cookies nearby, something like that. So having decent flavored liquids around as well is a good way to give your hands something to do while you're in that downtime. Kelsey, you're going to add something, it sounds like.
I had one other thought that I wanted to just touch on while we talk about the science and that feeding window. One of the other, I don't know if this would go into best practices or go someplace else, but one of the things I wanted to mention on the science, especially when we talk about like insulin sensitivity or blocking mTOR or reducing autophagy, is these aren't processes in our bodies that are necessarily on-off switches. They're more like sliding scales. So you see a lot of folks in the fasting community be like, oh my gosh, you put cream in your coffee, you're kicked out of the fasting club. Or, oh my gosh, your electrolytes have 3 net carbs, get out. Like you're not in the fasting club either. And the thought is that some of these foods totally turn off these beneficial systems in our body, when in reality, again, these are sliding scales. So if you need some electrolytes to get, or you need some flavored electrolytes because you can't just drink extra salty water, and there's a couple of net carbs in them, it's fine, right? You're still getting a benefit. If you need a little bit of cream in that coffee, it's fine, right? Where we come, the problem is when we're eating donuts for breakfast or we're eating full big meals multiple times throughout the day. So some of these little things, if there are these little things that you need to move throughout the day, it's okay. You're still going to get the benefit.
I had a fellow faster tell me one time I had broken fast because I was chewing sugar-free gum. They're like, no, you're out. You're on the out. And I'm like, I'm really not gonna turn off my fasting time.
I'm gonna change the secret password.
That's right. And I will actually, without giving too much details, I do want to warn anybody who would do this. There is something that I experienced, and I know a couple of other people have experienced. In that first week, there was a lot of loose bowel movements. Yeah. As you transitioned over, and as I was going into the intermittent fasting protocols, it was like my body was holding on to food, thinking it was going to need it. And so then when I would have that feasting time, my body was like, hey, we're going to eliminate everything we thought we needed stored up. So that was, I'm not trying to be overly gross about it, but be aware that if you decide to put an IF protocol in place, that it might also cause a little bit of that in that first like weekish or so. For either of you, any other thoughts on this topic? I mean, we're pretty much wrapping this one up, but any other thoughts on this topic? Obviously, everybody, I want you to know, if you catch us on our Facebook or on YouTube and there's other things you want to know about this subject, I would love to hear it from you. But Coach G, Coach Kelsey, anything else that you can think of on this topic before we take the next steps of how they want to get help with it?
G, do you have any thoughts?
Don't rush into it. Don't rush into it and just try to grind it out feeling like hell. Ease your way in, give yourself a lot of grace. Don't ask for perfection out of yourself right off the bat. Like if you're getting like a stress response, if you're getting jitters, if you're getting brain fog, maybe pump the brakes a little bit and take some of the foot off the gas pedal. I would also caution everybody here that it would be an unwise choice to try and start an intermittent fasting protocol at the same time that you are aggressively ramping up exercise. So if you are not fitnessing at all, I would not go super hard at the paint simultaneously. And it's not like these things can't coexist, right? If George St. Pierre and Rich Froning are intermittent fasting, clearly you can do aggressive, high volume, rigorous physical activity while being an intermittent faster. but you probably don't want to start both of those trains down the tracks at the same time.
Right.
No, those trains actually go toward each other if you do that.
Yeah.
So
Ain't nobody got time for that.
I just read an interesting article in Men's Health from Rich Froning, who talked specifically about his intermittent fasting protocol. And something important to remember about that is that he eats his biggest meal of the day in between his training sessions. So he is refeeding, he is fueling, he is being very intentional and smart about it. So it can be done, but you're right, G, it has to be done intelligently. So,
Yeah.
And then what I wanted to add, sort of this, just one last thought on it is I shared earlier about how for women and their cycles, this can be difficult in some ways because so men, you guys get basically the same hormones all month and you can kind of moderate with it. Women's cycles, everything shifts around, right? And I have found that in the first few days of my luteal phase, which is right after ovulation, when progesterone spikes, I cannot intermittent fast because I have terrible mood disorder, like biting back, like rage. And it's very, very disconcerting. And I'm looking into some other things about why that might be happening. But I have found that if I'm fasting, I get there quicker. So on those few days, I eat 4 meals usually and space them out. So I never have to risk that insulin either crashing or jumping or anything. I just work to maintain it throughout the day. So
yeah,
kind of what you mentioned, G, like trying to force it and being miserable. If you notice something that's not working, you don't have to stay there. Reach out to someone, ask, do some research, or back off, find a different window and find a different way to make it work. Like you mentioned, G, a 12-hour window of eating and fasting is really beneficial.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I think in general, you just got to tweak the game for you, just as you were saying there, Coach Kelsey. So one last question here for both of you, and I'll even answer this one too, but for CrossFitters who want any more help or any more info on the intermittent fasting game, what's the best way for them to get it? Coach G.
If you're into reading or audiobooks, Audible, the seminal text on this is definitely Dr. Jason Fung's The Obesity Code. Like, he is like the guy when it comes to this. I'm a big fan of Mark Sisson, so his book 2 Meals a Day was also super valuable for me. There's lots of podcasts for people that are intermittent fasters. And so if you want to get into the intermittent fasting club, as Kelsey talked about, you might
give you the
that
secret
as well.
password.
Yeah, the secret. Yeah, but only once you're in. No cream in the coffee.
Is that the phrase?
I don't know.
You just walk up to someone in the gym and go, "No cream in the coffee." Keep on walking. Is that?
But then, I mean, also, like, Kelsey and I have committed our lives to helping people find how to make healthy eating fit into their lives. So, little plug for Kelsey, Ignite, Nourish, Thrive. If you'd like to have her help, especially as a female, because she can really speak to how all of this works in the context of being a female, and all of the things that go with that.
Yep.
She could be really helpful for that as well. Here at CFE, we have a coaching team that helps out with healthy eating stuff also, so you can reach out to us, CrossFitEducation.com.
Yep. And I would just add to that too. I mean, if you're here in the CFE community and you just want to flat out ask me about my experience, I will gladly tell you about it. Again, it's been very beneficial for me, so I'm happy to answer any questions. But when it comes to practical, I'm going to point to those two people, and I'm going to say you should reach out to one of them for all of that stuff. But yeah, I think that is it, my friends. I think we're good for today. Again, you can get all of this at CrossFitEdwardsville.com. You can find more information. You can download our ebooks. Again, those other books, The Obesity Code by Dr. Jason Fung and 2 Meals a Day by Mark Sisson. Those are both great resources as well. So, Coach Kelsey, thank you so much for coming on today. Any final thoughts before we let you go?
Nope. Just thanks for having me on. I appreciate you guys.
Of course. And Coach G, any final thoughts for you?
No, I'm just looking forward to seeing the relaunch of Kelsey's podcast.
Oh yeah.
When's that going to happen?
Yeah,
I don't know yet. I'm not sure yet. We don't have a date. My VA is finalizing some procedures for us to be able to get everything so we can load smoothly. But I am really excited, and I can share with you guys. It's the Barbells and Bone Broth podcast, and it's going to be a little bit different. We're going to run seasons where we talk about a specific topic for 4 or 5 or 7 or 20, I don't know, episodes. So I'm really excited to be able to do deeper dives in a lot of subjects.
Awesome.
Cool.
Very cool.
Looking forward to it.
Well, thank you everybody for listening. Again, you can reach us at CrossFitEdwardsville.com or online Facebook at CrossFit Edwardsville or Instagram at CrossFit Edwardsville. I think that is it for now. Coach Kelsey, Coach G, thank you so much. Everybody, thank you for taking the time with us today. Go out there, have a championship day.